The last whisper of twilight clung to the ancient oak outside Ilara Vance's window, painting the sleepy town of Oakhaven in hues of lavender and deep indigo. Inside the Oakhaven Community Library, Ilara carefully shelved the final returned volume of the day, its well-worn spine fitting perfectly back into its designated place. The scent of old paper, polished wood, and the faint, sweet aroma of the lemon balm tea she'd been sipping all afternoon filled the air, a comforting symphony to her senses. Ilara loved her library. It wasn't grand or imposing like the city libraries she'd seen in glossy magazines. Instead, it was a warm, welcoming space, built from honey-colored local stone a century ago, with tall arched windows that overlooked a small, meticulously kept rose garden. The shelves, hand-carved by a local artisan decades ago, sagged just a little under the weight of stories spanning centuries. Every book felt like an old friend, every patron like family. At 28, Ilara had found her rhythm in Oakhaven. She lived in a small cottage just a 10-minute walk from the library, her days filled with the quiet satisfaction of connecting people with stories, researching local history for the occasional curious resident, and tending to the library's quirky personality, its slightly creaky floorboards, the resident robin that sometimes hopped in through an open window, and the ever-present hum of quiet discovery. She was a woman who found profound joy in the overlooked details of life, the way dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, the precise shade of green on a newly sprouted leaf, the subtle differences in the sound of rain on the library's slate roof versus her cottage's tin one. Yet, despite her contentment, a quiet corner of her heart held a gentle longing. It wasn't for grand adventures, not exactly, but for a connection that went beyond the friendly smiles and polite exchanges of her daily life. She often wondered about the lives hidden within the stories she shelved, the journeys contained in the travel guides, the passionate romances bound in elegant covers. She imagined what it might be like to have a story of her own unfold, a narrative as rich and compelling as the ones she guarded so carefully. Tonight, however, her thoughts were on the unusually quiet day. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she surveyed the empty reading room, the chairs tucked neatly under the tables, the lamps casting a gentle glow. It was rare for no one to drop in for a last-minute book or a quick chat before closing. The silence, though peaceful, felt a little too deep. As she began her nightly ritual of dimming lights and locking up, a sudden brisk knock echoed through the quiet space. Ilara jumped, her hand flying to her chest. She glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner, a gift from the town council when she'd taken over the library 5 years ago. It was 5 minutes past closing. "Hello?" she called out, a slight tremor in her voice. The knock came again, a bit firmer this time. Ilara hesitated, then walked towards the heavy oak door. Through the beveled glass, she could make out a tall figure, silhouetted against the deepening twilight. He looked purposeful. "Can I help you?" she asked, unlatching the door just enough to peer through the crack. A man stood on the threshold, a leather satchel slung across his shoulder. He was tall, with dark, slightly disheveled hair that hinted at a long day, and eyes that were a startling shade of green even in the fading light. A faint stubble shadowed his jaw, giving him an air of rugged intellect. "My apologies," he said, his voice a low, warm baritone that resonated through the quiet library. "I know you're closed. I just arrived in Oakhaven this afternoon, and I'm on a rather urgent quest. I was hoping the local library might hold the key." Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck. She wasn't used to such an imposing yet charming presence on her doorstep. "A quest?" she managed, her voice a little breathy. He offered a sheepish, disarming smile. "Forgive my dramatic phrasing. I'm Rhys Kincaid. I'm an architectural historian. I've come to Oakhaven to research the old Blackwood estate. I understand it has quite a history, and I'm particularly interested in its original plans, perhaps even some early sketches or property deeds." Ilara's eyes widened. The Blackwood estate. It was an imposing Gothic revival mansion on the outskirts of town, long abandoned and shrouded in local legends of forgotten fortunes and star-crossed lovers. It was a place she often imagined exploring in her own quiet daydreams. "The Blackwood estate," she repeated, her interest instantly piqued. "Yes, it certainly has a history. We have some records, though they're not often consulted. Most people prefer the ghost stories." She pushed the door open a little wider, her shyness momentarily forgotten in the face of such a fascinating request. "Please come in, Mr. Kincaid. It's too late for a full research session, but I can point you in the right direction. Reese stepped inside, bringing with him the subtle scent of pine and something else. Rain on old stone, perhaps. He glanced around the library, his gaze lingering on the tall shelves and the warm lamplight. It's even more charming than I imagined, he said, his voice sincere. Thank you for letting me in. Elara Vance, she introduced herself, extending a hand. His grip was firm, warm, and brief. A small spark, like static electricity, seemed to pass between them. A pleasure, Elara Vance, he replied, his green eyes meeting hers. A genuine smile softened the lines around his eyes. You clearly care for this place. It's my life, she admitted, feeling a flutter in her chest. Now, the Blackwood Estate. Most of our local history is kept in the archives downstairs. She led him past the main circulation desk, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke about the library's treasures. The Blackwood family were quite private. Their original residence was built in the late 1880s by a shipbuilding magnate who moved inland after a series of unfortunate maritime investments. The current mansion, however, was commissioned by his grandson, Alistair Blackwood, in 1910. It's said he built it as a tribute to his lost love, a dancer from the city. Reese listened intently, his gaze fixed on her as she spoke, a silent appreciation in his eyes that made Elara feel both seen and oddly flustered. That's precisely the kind of detail I'm hoping to uncover, he said. The architectural style is so unique for this region, almost out of place. I'm trying to understand the intent behind it, the narrative woven into its very foundations. Well, if it's narrative you're after, you've come to the right place, Elara chuckled softly. We have a folder dedicated to the Blackwood family, though it mostly contains newspaper clippings and a few rather dramatic letters. But the maps? She paused, her eyes lighting up. The maps might be more useful. We have a set of early 20th century ordnance survey maps that show land ownership and building footprints. They're quite detailed. She led him to a large, flat file cabinet tucked away in a quiet corner. With a soft click, she pulled open one of the wide drawers, revealing an array of rolled and folded maps, smelling faintly of parchment and history. She carefully selected a heavy, canvas-backed map, its edges frayed with age, and unrolled it on a nearby table. Reese leaned over, his head close to hers, as Elara pointed a slender finger at a section of the map. Here it is, Blackwood Manor. You can see the original footprint here, and then the extension that was added later. It's quite significant. We also have a few photographs from the 1920s that might show some of the architectural details you're looking for, though they're not blueprints. Reese traced a line on the map with his finger. Remarkable. The scale is excellent. This confirms some of my preliminary theories about the structural additions, and the photographs, even if not architectural plans, could provide invaluable contextual clues. He looked up, his gaze intense. Elara, this is a gold mine. Thank you. Is there any chance I could spend some proper time with these tomorrow? Of course, she replied, a warmth spreading through her chest. We open at 9. I can set aside a table for you in the local history section. I'll even pull the Blackwood family folder and the photograph albums for you. That would be incredibly helpful, he said, standing upright. I'm staying at the Oakhaven Inn just down the road. I'll be here first thing. He hesitated, then added, It's rare to find such dedication and such a keen understanding of local history in a librarian. You're truly an asset to this town. Elara felt her cheeks flush again. Compliments, especially sincere ones, always caught her a little off guard. It's my passion, she confessed, meeting his gaze. Every old building, every forgotten document holds a story. And I believe those stories deserve to be heard. He smiled, a genuine appreciative smile that reached his eyes. I couldn't agree more. Well, I mustn't keep you from locking up. Thank you again, Elara, for staying open, for your help, for everything. As he turned to leave, Elara realized she was still holding the map, her fingers tracing the faint lines of the Blackwood estate. It was my pleasure, Mr. Kincaid, she called after him. Reese, please, he corrected, pausing at the door. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, Elara. With a final nod, he stepped back out into the twilight, the heavy door closing softly behind him, leaving Elara alone once more in the quiet library. But the silence no longer felt too deep. It was filled instead with the echo of a warm voice, the lingering scent of pine, and the exciting prospect of a new story unfolding. She took a moment, leaning against the flat file cabinet to simply breathe. Reese Kincaid, an architectural historian. Drawn to Oakhaven by the very mysteries she found so compelling. It felt serendipitous, like a character stepping out of one of her beloved books. She carefully re-rolled the map and placed it back in its drawer, then spent a little longer than usual tidying the local history section, already anticipating Rya's return. She found herself imagining him sitting at the large oak table, surrounded by old documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. She wondered about the details of his work, the kind of buildings he usually studied, the places he'd traveled. It was a pleasant distraction from her usual routine, a gentle ripple in the calm pond of her life. Finally, she locked the library door, the click echoing in the stillness of the street. The air outside was cool and crisp, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and distant wood smoke. As she walked home beneath the soft glow of the streetlights, her mind was still buzzing. Her cottage, though small, was her sanctuary. It smelled of lavender and freshly baked bread. She liked to bake on quiet evenings. Tonight, however, she didn't feel like kneading dough. Instead, she made herself a cup of chamomile tea, lit a single candle on her windowsill, and pulled out a battered copy of Oakhaven, a local history, a book she knew almost by heart. She flipped to the section on the Blackwood family, rereading the familiar passages with new eyes, searching for any detail she might have overlooked, any nugget of information that could aid Reese in his quest. The book spoke of Alistair Blackwood's grand vision, his heartbreak, and the estate's eventual decline into disrepair. It mentioned the local rumors of secret passages and hidden rooms, tales that had captivated her as a child. Elara found herself smiling into her teacup. It wasn't just the prospect of helping Reese that excited her, it was the shared passion. The rare joy of finding someone who saw the magic in history, in old architecture, in the forgotten whispers of the past. Most people in Oakhaven appreciated the library, but few delved into its depths with such focused intensity. Meanwhile, Reese Kincaid was settling into his room at the Oakhaven Inn, a charmingly old-fashioned establishment with creaky floorboards and the comforting aroma of beeswax polish. He dropped his satchel on the antique chest of drawers and was now standing by the window, looking out at the quiet, darkened street. He pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from his jacket pocket, flipping it open to a page covered in his precise scholarly handwriting. Blackwood Estate, Oakhaven, East T. 1910, by Alistair Blackwood. Architect unknown, likely foreign-influenced given the unusual Gothic revival elements. He added a new line, librarian Elara Vance, exceptional local knowledge, keen interest in history. Check local maps, family archives, 1920s, photographs. A.G. Reese found himself replaying their brief conversation. Elara Vance died tall. Her quiet competence, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of old stories, the gentle blush that touched her cheeks. She wasn't like the stern, efficient librarians he often encountered in larger institutions. She had a warmth, an unassuming charm that was utterly captivating. He'd come to Oakhaven on a professional mission, commissioned by a historical trust to assess the Blackwood estate for potential restoration. It was a challenging project, requiring a deep dive into obscure records and architectural precedents. He hadn't expected to find such a delightful guide. He thought of the way her slender finger had traced the lines on the map, the soft brush of her sleeve against his when they leaned over it. He'd been momentarily distracted from his academic pursuit, a rare occurrence for him. It was a pleasant distraction, though, one that promised to make his stay in Oakhaven far more interesting than he'd initially anticipated. He unpacked his few belongings, his mind still on the library and its fascinating caretaker. He was a man accustomed to solitude, to long hours spent poring over dusty texts and crumbling blueprints. His work was his passion, and it often left little room for anything else. But Elara Vance had a way of making him feel like there was something more to discover in Oakhaven than just the secrets of the Blackwood estate. He decided to take a short walk before turning in to clear his head and get a feel for the town by night. The air was cool, and the moon, a sliver of silver, cast long shadows. He passed the library again, its windows dark now, a quiet sentinel guarding its treasures. He imagined Elara in her small cottage, perhaps reading, perhaps still thinking of the Blackwood estate. A genuine smile touched his lips. He was looking forward to tomorrow. More than just the research, he realized. He was looking forward to seeing Elara again. To her quiet enthusiasm, her knowledgeable explanations, and the way her eyes held a hint of adventure that belied her gentle demeanor, he returned to the inn, feeling a sense of anticipation he hadn't expected. This small town, with its ancient trees and its charming librarian, was already starting to weave its way into his heart. He fell asleep with the image of the old map in his mind, and the soft echo of Elara Vance's voice, like a whispered promise of stories yet to be told. He fell asleep with the image of the old map in his mind, and the soft echo of Elara Vance's voice, like a whispered promise of stories yet to be told. The morning light, dappled through the ancient oak outside his window, found Reese already stirring. There was a lightness to his chest, an unfamiliar buoyancy that chased away the usual morning haze. He found himself eager to rise, not because of a looming deadline or a demanding schedule, but because of a quiet, hopeful anticipation. Oakhaven, with its gentle rhythm and its enigmatic librarian, had begun to cast its spell. He dressed quickly, opting for a comfortable but neat button-down shirt and chinos, feeling a subtle urge to make a good impression. Downstairs, the inn's small dining room was already bustling with a handful of locals and a few other travelers. He ordered a simple breakfast of oatmeal and toast, savoring the robust coffee and the low murmur of conversations around him. He overheard snippets about the annual harvest festival, a new shipment of books at the library, and the unexpected warmth of the late autumn days. Each detail, previously unremarkable, now felt connected to Elara, to the life she lived and loved. Finishing his breakfast, Reese felt an irresistible pull towards the library. He didn't need an excuse, but he found one anyway, a perfectly reasonable one for an architect interested in history. He wanted to examine the map more closely, perhaps sketch some of the forgotten landmarks, or research the building styles prevalent during the map's creation. It was a flimsy veil for his true desire, to see Elara again. The library was bathed in the soft morning light, dust motes dancing in the sunbeams that streamed through the tall windows. Elara was at the main desk, her head bent over a ledger, her dark hair falling forward. She looked up as he entered, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips, making her eyes crinkle at the corners. "Mr. Kincaid," she said, her voice a warm murmur that made his name sound pleasant. "Good morning. I didn't expect to see you so soon." "Riss, please," he corrected gently, stepping closer. "And good morning, Elara. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I couldn't stop thinking about that map. It's truly fascinating. I was hoping to take a closer look, perhaps make some notes." "Of course," she said, her smile widening. "No disturbance at all. It's not often someone shares my enthusiasm for Oakhaven's forgotten past." She led him back to the small alcove where they had been the day before. The map, carefully rolled, was retrieved from its special drawer. Unfurling it on the polished wood table, Elara smoothed out the ancient parchment with careful hands. Reese leaned over it, tracing a finger along the faded lines. "The detail is incredible, and the names, Whispering Woods, the Old Millstone Path, Lady's Pond. They sound like something out of a fairy tale." Elara nodded, her gaze dreamy. "They do, don't they? Oakhaven has always been a town steeped in stories. My grandmother used to tell me tales about children getting lost in the Whispering Woods, only to emerge days later with pockets full of peculiar, glowing stones." She chuckled, a soft, musical sound. "Of course, she always said it was just the moonlight playing tricks." "Perhaps," Reese mused, but he found himself drawn to the romantic notion. "Have you ever explored these areas?" Elara hesitated, looking away for a moment. "Some of them. The Whispering Woods are still very much there, though a lot of the old paths are overgrown. Lady's Pond is now part of the town park, though it's much smaller than it was. The Millstone Path? That's lost to time, I think. People built over it decades ago." Psst. She sighed softly. "It's sad, isn't it? How much history we lose, simply by not paying attention." "It is," Reese agreed, meeting her gaze. "That's partly why I do what I do, trying to preserve the integrity of old structures, blending the past with the present in new designs, to give them a future without erasing their history." He found himself speaking more openly than he usually would, a response to her quiet sincerity. "That's a beautiful philosophy," Elara said, her eyes alight with understanding. "So, your project here in Oakhaven, is it about restoring an old building?" Reese hesitated. His project was more of a self-imposed exile, a retreat from a demanding, high-pressure career that had left him feeling hollow. He had come to Oakhaven seeking quiet, a place to simply be, to rediscover his passion for design without the corporate constraints. He had vague ideas of sketching, perhaps even pitching a design for a new community center that blended Oakhaven's natural beauty with modern needs, but it was all still nascent. Something like that, he admitted, a small, wry smile playing on his lips. More of a personal exploration, really. I've been feeling a bit disconnected from the essence of my work lately. Oakhaven, with its history and its charm, felt like the perfect place to reconnect. Alara looked at him, her expression gentle and knowing. I understand that feeling. Sometimes I think the books here are my only connection to the wider world, and even then it's through other people's stories. It's easy to feel a bit isolated in a small town, even when you love it. Their eyes met, and in that shared moment of quiet understanding, a thread of connection stretched between them, fragile but strong. Reese felt a warmth bloom in his chest, a sense of being truly seen for the first time in a long while. They spent the next hour poring over the map, Alara pointing out local landmarks she knew, Reese sketching small details in a notebook he'd pulled from his bag. He found himself enjoying the quiet companionship, the easy rhythm of their conversation. He learned that Alara had grown up in Oakhaven, had gone to college a few towns over, but had always returned, drawn by the sense of belonging and the sheer volume of stories waiting to be discovered within these library walls. It's not everyone's dream, I suppose, she said, almost apologetically, as if she expected him to scoff. Living in the same small town your whole life, working in a library. But I love it. Every book is a journey, every old document a portal to another time. It sounds wonderful, Reese said sincerely, meeting her gaze. To find such fulfillment in what you do. Many people search their whole lives for that. He thought of his own high-flying career, the accolades, the impressive projects, and the gnawing emptiness that had eventually pushed him away. The library began to fill with a few more patrons, and Alara occasionally excused herself to assist someone. Reese watched her, admiring her patient demeanor, her quiet efficiency. When she returned, she found him still engrossed in the map. I'm going to grab some lunch soon, she said, glancing at the clock. There's a lovely little place called the Willow Creek Cafe, just a few blocks from here. They make the best pecan pie in the county. Sounds tempting, Reese said, rolling up the map carefully. Thank you for letting me monopolize your morning, Alara. I really appreciate it. Anytime, Reese, she replied, her eyes sparkling. It was a pleasure. Perhaps I'll see you there at the cafe? She offered, a hint of shyness in her tone. Reese's heart gave a little lurch. Perhaps, he said, letting the word hang in the air, a silent invitation. He left the library with a spring in his step, heading towards the cafe. He found a table by the window, ordered a hearty sandwich, and, true to her word, a slice of pecan pie. He ate slowly, savoring the flavors, and watched the street. A few minutes later, he saw Alara emerge from the library, pull a light cardigan tighter around herself, and head in the direction of the cafe. He caught her eye as she entered, and she gave him a shy, genuine smile. Table for one? She asked, gesturing to the empty chair opposite him. I was hoping for two, he replied, feeling a flush of warmth spread through him. She laughed softly as she sat down. Excellent choice of pie, by the way. They talked throughout lunch, their conversation flowing easily from the map to local gossip, from their shared love of old books to their favorite childhood memories. Reese found himself opening up to her, sharing stories about his unconventional family, his early struggles with finding his path. Alara in turn told him about growing up in Oakhaven, her mischievous younger brother, and her dreams of one day writing her own book, a collection of local legends and forgotten tales. The afternoon passed in a blur of comfortable conversation and shared laughter. By the time they parted ways outside the cafe, with promises of continuing their map research, Reese felt a profound sense of contentment. He spent the rest of the day exploring Oakhaven, discovering a quaint bookshop, a charming park with ancient willow trees, and a small art gallery. But even as he admired the town, his thoughts kept returning to Alara, to her quiet enthusiasm, her knowledgeable explanations, and the way her eyes held a hint of adventure that belied her gentle demeanor. Well, the next few days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Reese found himself drawn to the library each morning, ostensibly to continue his research on the old map, but undeniably to spend time with Alara. They would sit together in the quiet alcove, the map spread between them, poring over its faded script and intricate drawings. Alara, with her encyclopedic knowledge of Oakhaven's history, would pull out dusty town records, old newspapers, and even personal journals donated to the library, searching for clues about the forgotten landmarks. One afternoon, she unearthed a small leather-bound diary from the late 19th century, written by a young woman named Clara, who had lived on the outskirts of the Whispering Woods. Clara's elegant cursive described long walks along the millstone path to a hidden glade where ancient stone markers stood, adorned with carvings of oak leaves and acorns. "The millstone path isn't completely lost," Elara exclaimed, her finger tracing a faint line on the map. Clara describes it as winding parallel to Willow Creek, just behind what is now the old Oakhaven Mill ruins. It was a shortcut to the glade, where the townsfolk used to gather for midsummer celebrations. Rhys felt a thrill of discovery. And the stone markers? The glade? Elara's eyes shone with excitement. Clara writes about them in great detail. She called it the Oakheart Glade. She believed it was a sacred place, where the oldest trees of the Whispering Woods grew, and where the town's founders held their first council. They spent the rest of the day cross-referencing Clara's diary with other records, piecing together a clearer picture of the path and the glade. The idea of finding this forgotten place, of walking in Clara's footsteps, began to take root. "We should go," Rhys said suddenly, looking up from the map to meet Elara's gaze. "We should find the millstone path and the Oakheart Glade." Elara's breath hitched slightly. Her adventurous spirit, usually confined to the pages of books, flickered to life. "Oh, Rhys," she murmured, a mix of excitement and trepidation in her voice. I've always wanted to, but it's probably terribly overgrown now, and I wouldn't even know where to begin." "That's where the map comes in," Rhys countered, a hopeful glint in his eyes. "And Clara's diary. We have clues, and besides," he added softly, "adventures are always better with company." He saw a blush rise on her cheeks, and her gaze dropped to the map. "It would be an adventure, wouldn't it?" she whispered, almost to herself. "A real one." The next morning, Rhys arrived at the library with a small backpack, a sturdy pair of walking shoes, and a renewed sense of purpose. He found Elara already at the desk, looking a little nervous, but also undeniably excited. She had traded her usual cardigan for a practical fleece jacket, and her hair was tied back in a neat ponytail. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound casual, though her hands fluttered slightly as she tidied a stack of books. "Are you ready for our expedition?" "As I'll ever be," Rhys grinned, feeling a lightness in his step. "I brought some water and snacks. Do we have a plan?" Elara unrolled the map, her professional librarian demeanor returning as she pointed to a spot near the old mill ruins, just outside the current town limits. Clara's diary mentioned starting at the old stone bridge over Willow Creek. From there, the path should follow the creek upstream into the woods. "It might be overgrown, but if we stick to the creek, we should find it." They walked out of Oakhaven, the gentle autumn sun warming their backs. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Rhys found himself enjoying the simple act of walking beside Elara, their shoulders occasionally brushing, their conversation a comfortable ebb and flow. She pointed out various trees, identifying them by their leaves and bark, sharing snippets of local folklore associated with each species. He, in turn, told her about the structural integrity of the old mill ruins they passed, imagining the hustle and bustle that once animated the now silent stone walls. As they delved deeper into the woods, the main path began to thin, giving way to narrower, less trodden trails. The trees grew taller and closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dappled canopy. The sunlight became softer, filtered through a million leaves, creating a magical, almost ethereal glow. "This must be it," Elara whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "The Whispering Woods." Rhys nodded, his senses alive. The air here was cooler, imbued with the scent of pine and damp moss. He could hear the faint gurgle of Willow Creek nearby guiding their way. They pushed through some low-hanging branches, their boots crunching on the fallen leaves, and then a gasp from Elara. "Look!" she exclaimed, pointing. Hidden beneath a thick blanket of ivy and moss, barely visible, was a low, flat stone, clearly man-made, etched with a faint, almost entirely faded pattern. "An old stepping stone," Rhys murmured, kneeling down to brush away the debris. "Part of a path." With renewed vigor, they followed the faint indentations in the ground, occasionally unearthing another moss-covered stone. The path was indeed overgrown, swallowed by decades of neglect, but with Alara's keen eye and Reese's steady determination, they slowly pieced together its elusive trail. After nearly an hour of careful searching, the trees began to thin slightly, and a soft emerald light permeated the space ahead. They emerged into a small clearing, bathed in the soft green glow. 4 ancient oak trees stood sentinel at its corners, their massive trunks gnarled and powerful, their branches reaching skyward as if in silent prayer. And in the center, almost perfectly preserved, stood a circle of moss-covered stones, each one intricately carved with symbols of leaves, acorns, and what looked like a stylized heart. "The Oakheart Glade," Alara breathed, her voice filled with awe. She walked slowly towards the stones, her fingers tracing the carvings, her eyes wide with reverence. "It's exactly as Clara described it." Reese stood back, watching her, a profound sense of satisfaction settling over him. He had found something truly special, not just a forgotten glade, but a spark of pure joy in Alara's eyes. He felt a connection to this place, and to her, that transcended the simple act of discovery. It was a shared moment, a whispered secret between them and the ancient trees. They spent a long time in the glade, sitting on one of the smooth, cool stones, sharing the sandwiches and fruit Reese had packed. Alara read excerpts from Clara's diary, her voice soft and melodic, bringing the past to life. Reese listened, sketching the glade in his notebook, capturing the play of light and shadow, the stoic beauty of the ancient oaks. "This is what I came to Oakhaven for," Reese confessed, looking at Alara. "This feeling, this sense of peace, of history, of genuine discovery. I'd lost it, somewhere along the way, chasing bigger, more glamorous projects. I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply marvel." Alara looked at him, her gaze gentle and understanding. "I know that feeling, Reese. Sometimes I worry I'll get lost in the books, lost in other people's stories, and forget to live my own. But being here with you, finding this, it feels like I'm writing a new chapter." Their eyes met, and this time, the unspoken emotions between them were palpable. There was a warmth, a tenderness that had been steadily growing, like the moss on the ancient stones, quiet but persistent. Reese reached out, his fingers gently brushing hers where they rested on the smooth stone between them. Her skin was soft and warm, and she didn't pull away. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Reese murmured, his voice low. Alara smiled, a shy, hopeful smile that lit up the glade more brightly than the sun. "I hope so, Reese. I truly hope so." The walk back was easier, their steps lighter, buoyed by the thrill of their discovery and the burgeoning connection between them. The woods, which had seemed mysterious and a little daunting on the way in, now felt familiar and welcoming. As they emerged from the whispering woods, back into the open fields leading to Oakhaven, the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. Reese walked Alara to her small, charming cottage, nestled amidst a riot of late-blooming flowers. The porch light cast a warm glow on her face as she turned to him. "Thank you, Reese," she said, her voice soft. "Today was wonderful. More than I could have imagined." "Thank you, Alara," he replied, his gaze lingering on her. "For the map, for the stories, for the adventure." He wanted to reach out, to touch her cheek, to tell her how much her presence had come to mean to him in such a short time. But he held back, knowing that some things needed to unfold at their own pace. He simply smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "There are still so many secrets on that map, aren't there?" Ilara's eyes sparkled. "Oh yes, Reese, so many more stories waiting to be told." He watched her disappear into her cottage, the door closing softly behind her. The evening air felt cool, but Reese's heart was warm. Oakhaven was no longer just a retreat. It was becoming a home, filled with the promise of shared adventures and a love story just beginning to unfold. The old map, he realized, was not just a guide to forgotten places, but a blueprint for a future he hadn't dared to dream of until now. He watched her disappear into her cottage, the door closing softly behind her. The evening air felt cool, but Rissa's heart was warm. Oakhaven was no longer just a retreat. It was becoming a home, filled with the promise of shared adventures and a love story just beginning to unfold. The old map, he realized, was not just a guide to forgotten places, but a blueprint for a future he hadn't dared to dream of until now. Reese walked back to his own cottage, the familiar path feeling somehow new beneath his feet. The scent of honeysuckle mingled with damp earth, and the distant hoot of an owl seemed to hum a lullaby. Inside, his cottage felt cozier, less empty than it had just days ago. He didn't immediately settle down to write, though the words for his novel usually called to him at this hour. Tonight, his mind was filled with Clara, her bright eyes, her infectious laughter, the way her hand had felt in his so naturally as if it had always belonged there. He sat by the window, gazing out at the moon-kissed landscape, the silhouette of Clara's cottage a comforting presence. The map still lay on his coffee table, a silent invitation. He ran a finger over the worn parchment, tracing the faint lines and symbols. This wasn't just about finding hidden spots. It was about the journey, about sharing discoveries, about building something beautiful with someone special. A quiet smile touched his lips. He hadn't felt this hopeful, this utterly joyeux in a very long time. Sleep eventually claimed him, a gentle blanket woven with dreams of sun-dappled groves and shared smiles. Meanwhile, in her own cottage, Clara was just as caught in the lingering magic of the evening. She moved through her studio, tidying brushes and paints, but her thoughts were far from her canvases. Reese. The name resonated within her, a soft melody. She'd always been an intuitive soul, quick to connect with people, but with Reese, it was different. It felt deeper, more profound, like finding a lost piece of herself. He saw her, truly saw her, not just the artist, but the woman beneath the vibrant exterior. She remembered the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet strength in his hands, the thoughtful pauses in his conversation. And a waterfall? It had been more than just a beautiful discovery. It had been a testament to shared wonder, a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. She pulled out her sketchbook, not to draw the waterfall, but to capture the feeling of the evening. Swirls of blues and greens, interwoven with warm golds and soft reds, emerged on the page. The colors of hope, of connection, of a heart slowly but surely opening. She drifted off to sleep with a contented sigh, her dreams painted in the hues of a budding romance. The next morning, Oakhaven awoke under a sky of brilliant blue, promising a perfect day. Reese, surprisingly refreshed, found himself humming as he made coffee. He felt a lightness he hadn't experienced since before his creative block, a sense of anticipation that hummed beneath his skin. He decided to take a walk, not with a specific destination in mind, but simply to breathe in the Oakhaven air and let his thoughts unfurl. He found Clara in her small garden, tending to a riot of colorful blooms. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, her auburn hair escaping in charming tendrils, and a smudge of dirt adorned her cheek. She looked up, her smile radiating warmth. "Morning, Reese," she called out, her voice a melody. "Sleeping in?" He chuckled. "Hardly. Woke up with a strange urge to explore." He gestured vaguely around them. "The world just feels a little brighter today." Clara straightened, pulling off her gardening gloves. "It does, doesn't it? I was just thinking about that. Perhaps it's Oakhaven's way of welcoming us." She paused, her gaze meeting his, and a silent understanding passed between them. Or perhaps it's something else entirely. He walked closer, leaning against the low stone wall that bordered her garden. "I was thinking about the map," he confessed. "Still a few mysteries waiting to be solved." Her eyes sparkled. "Oh, definitely. I couldn't help but glance at it again this morning. There's a spot, just to the north, marked with what looks like a cluster of intertwined trees. It's labeled, rather poetically, the Whispering Grove." "The Whispering Grove," Reese repeated, the name rolling off his tongue. "Sounds like a place where secrets are told, or perhaps discovered." "Exactly." Clara clapped her hands together lightly. "And I happen to have a picnic basket packed. I was planning on an art excursion, but a map-led adventure sounds far more exciting." Reese's heart gave a little leap. "A picnic and a quest? That sounds perfect. Give me 10 minutes to grab my notebook and a bottle of water." And so, a new adventure began. They set off an hour later, Clara carrying a charming wicker basket, and Reese with his small backpack containing water, snacks, and of course, his ever-present notebook. The path north was less defined than the one to the waterfall, winding through ancient woodlands where sunlight dappled through the canopy in shifting patterns of gold and green. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, punctuated by the cheerful chirping of unseen birds. Clara led the way, consulting the map with an air of playful seriousness. According to this, we need to follow the old deer trail until we reach a cluster of 3 exceptionally tall oaks. Then, we go off trail, just a little towards where the brook makes a sharp bend. Reese enjoyed watching her, her enthusiasm infectious. She pointed out interesting fungi, identified bird calls, and shared snippets of local folklore she'd heard from Mrs. Gable at the post office. "They say the Fae sometimes dance in these woods at twilight," she told him, her voice a hushed whisper, as if sharing a precious secret. "Do you believe in Fae, Clara?" he asked, a smile playing on his lips. She tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. "I believe in magic, Reese, and sometimes magic needs a little help from our imagination to truly manifest. These woods certainly feel enchanted, don't they?" He looked around, at the towering trees, the shafts of light piercing the gloom, the quiet hum of nature. "They do," he admitted, a sense of wonder settling over him. "I used to think of inspiration as something I had to force, to wrestle into submission. Here, it feels like it's just waiting to be noticed." They walked for what felt like an hour, their conversation flowing easily, shifting from the practicalities of navigating the forest to deeper reflections on life, art, and the unexpected turns their own paths had taken. Reese found himself opening up about his struggles with his novel, the pressure he felt, and the self-doubt that often plagued him. Clara listened patiently, her eyes warm with understanding. "It sounds like you've been carrying a heavy burden, Reese," she said softly. "But creation isn't always about struggle. Sometimes it's about play, about letting go and trusting the process." She paused, then added, "And about finding your muse in unexpected places." Her gaze flickered to him, a shy, knowing smile on her lips. A warmth spread through Reese at her words, a sensation that went deeper than the sun on his skin. He realized how much he valued her perspective, her gentle wisdom. He had been so focused on his own internal landscape, he hadn't fully appreciated how much external beauty and connection could nurture his creative spirit. Finally, Clara stopped. "Here," she announced, her voice hushed. "The 3 oaks, Tortiamtur." Indeed, ahead of them stood 3 ancient oak trees, their branches gnarled and thick with centuries of growth, forming a natural archway. Beyond them, the path dissolved into a tangle of ferns and moss-covered stones. Following Clara's directions, they carefully picked their way through the undergrowth, the sound of a babbling brook growing louder. They rounded a bend and Reese gasped. Before them lay a clearing, circular and perfectly serene, ringed by trees so old their trunks were like wise, wrinkled faces. The sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, creating a kaleidoscope of shifting light and shadow on the mossy ground. In the very center stood a solitary smooth gray stone, worn by time and weather, inviting rest. The air here felt different, still, profound, as if the very trees were holding their breath, listening. It was, without a doubt, the Whispering Grove. "It's incredible," Reese breathed, his writer's mind already spinning with images and metaphors. Clara's expression was one of quiet awe. "I knew it would be special, but this..." She trailed off, her eyes wide with wonder. "It feels sacred." They carefully made their way to the central stone, clearing a spot to lay out their picnic. Clara unpacked crusty bread, artisanal cheese, plump grapes, and small, sweet tarts. Reese poured water into their cups. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, simply absorbing the atmosphere of the grove, the gentle whispers of the breeze through the leaves above them. "Do you hear it?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reese listened, straining his ears. "The wind?" "More than that," she clarified. "It's like the trees are sighing, telling stories to each other, secrets held for centuries." He closed his eyes, focusing. And then, he thought he did. A subtle rustling, a low, ethereal hum that seemed to resonate deep within the earth, carrying echoes of time long past. It was less a sound and more a feeling, a deep sense of peace intertwined with ancient mystery. "It's beautiful, Clara," he said, opening his eyes and looking at her. "Thank you for bringing me here." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you for coming. Some places are meant to be shared." They sat there for a long time, talking in hushed tones, their voices blending with the whispers of the grove. They spoke of their childhoods, of the dreams they'd nurtured and the disappointments they'd faced. Reese shared his anxieties about his career, the fear that he might never write anything truly meaningful again. Clara, in turn, spoke of the pressure she sometimes felt to conform her art to commercial expectations, the battle between creating for joy and creating for a living. "It's hard, isn't it?" she mused, picking at a loose thread on her picnic blanket. "To stay true to yourself when the world constantly pulls you in different directions." Reese nodded slowly. "Especially when the self-doubt creeps in. When you start to question if your voice even matters." He felt a rare vulnerability as he spoke, a rawness he seldom exposed. His last book had been critically acclaimed, but the process had been arduous, leaving him creatively drained. He worried he was a one-hit wonder. Clara reached out, her hand gently covering his on the mossy ground. Her touch was warm, reassuring. "Your voice absolutely matters, Reese. I've read your book. It moved me. It has a quiet power, a depth that resonates." Her thumb stroked the back of his hand lightly. "And seeing you here, experiencing Oakhaven, seeing the way you notice the small things, the way your eyes light up when we find something new. That's the heart of a storyteller, isn't it? That curiosity, that openness to wonder." His gaze met hers, and in her eyes he saw not judgment or pity, but genuine belief. It was a balm to his weary soul, a whisper of hope in the deepest corners of his heart. He squeezed her hand, a silent thank you that spoke volumes. In that moment, surrounded by the ancient whispers of the grove, he felt a profound connection, a sense of being truly seen and understood that transcended words. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose, they packed up their picnic. The walk back felt lighter, filled with a comfortable silence punctuated by shared smiles and occasional glances. Reese felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just for his writing, but for the life he was building here in Oakhaven with Clara. Back in the village, the lights of the cottages twinkled, welcoming them home. "That was truly magical, Clara," Reese said, as they stood outside her cottage, the air now cool and crisp. "It was," she agreed, her voice soft. "A perfect Oakhaven discovery." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come in for some tea? I have some lovely herbal blends." "I'd love to," he replied, a warmth spreading through him. The thought of spending more time with her, in the cozy intimacy of her cottage, felt like the most natural thing in the world. Inside, Clara's cottage was a vibrant reflection of her personality. Canvases leaned against walls, some finished, some works in progress, bursting with color and life. Bookshelves overflowed with art history tomes and eclectic novels. The air smelled faintly of paint and something sweet like lavender and cinnamon. She brewed the tea, and they settled onto her comfortable sofa, mug steaming between them. The conversation continued easily, delving into their shared love for stories, for beauty, for the quiet moments that truly shaped a life. Reese found himself telling her about his upcoming research trip to a small historical archive in a nearby town. A necessary step for the historical novel he was planning, but one he'd been dreading. "It's a bit of a dry topic historically," he admitted with a wry smile. "Old parish records, dusty ledgers. Not exactly the stuff of epic romance." Clara tilted her head, a thoughtful expression on her face. "But think of the lives hidden within those records, Rice. The everyday heroes, the forgotten loves, the quiet dramas. There's always a story, even in the driest facts, if you look closely enough. Perhaps you'll find a lost love letter or a forgotten portrait in the margins of a ledger." Her eyes twinkled. "You never know where inspiration will strike." Her enthusiasm was contagious. He suddenly found himself looking forward to the trip, seeing it through her eyes, imagining the possibilities. She had a way of reframing things, of finding the sparkle in the mundane. As the evening deepened, a comfortable quiet settled between them. They sat for a while, simply enjoying each other's presence, the gentle clinking of their mugs the only sound. Reese felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling of belonging that had been missing from his life for so long. He looked at Clara, her profile soft in the lamplight, and knew that Oakhaven, with its ancient maps and hidden groves, was only the beginning. It was Clara who was truly helping him find his way home. When it was time to leave, he felt a reluctance he hadn't anticipated. He stood at her door, the night air cool on his face. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice a little husky. For today. For everything. She reached out, her fingers lightly touching his arm. The pleasure was all mine, Reese. And there are still so many stories on that map, aren't there? Her smile was soft, inviting. He nodded, meeting her gaze. So many more. He wanted to linger, to pull her into a hug, to express the surge of affection he felt. But he held back, cherishing the slow, gentle unfolding of their connection. This wasn't a sprint. It was a journey to be savored. He walked back to his cottage under a sky dusted with a million stars, each one a tiny beacon of hope. The old map still lay on his coffee table, its secrets waiting. But now, it wasn't just about the places. It was about the person he was discovering them with, the woman who was slowly, surely, becoming an integral part of his story. Oakhaven was indeed a home, but it was Clara who was making it feel like magic. He woke the next morning with a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The crisp Oakhaven air, usually just a familiar scent, now carried a faint echo of Clara's laughter, a whisper of her gentle presence. He made himself coffee, the aroma filling the cottage, and found himself smiling at the old map on the table. It wasn't just a collection of lines and symbols anymore. It was a promise, a shared adventure waiting to unfold. A soft knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Clara, a basket woven from willow branches slung over her arm, her smile as bright as the morning sun. "Good morning," she said, her voice like wind chimes. "I thought you might appreciate some fresh berries from my garden, and perhaps a bit of company." His heart gave a hopeful flutter. "More than you know, Clara. Come in." She stepped inside, bringing with her the fresh scent of ripe fruit and something indefinable, something warm and inviting that instantly made the cottage feel less like a temporary dwelling and more like a home. They sat at his small kitchen table, sharing berries and conversation that flowed as easily as the stream behind his cottage. She told him about her grandmother, who had taught her to garden and whose stories of Oakhaven had first enchanted her. He spoke of his own wanderlust, how maps were his first love, and how, ironically, he'd never truly felt rooted anywhere until he stumbled upon this quiet village. "Oakhaven has a way of holding on to you, doesn't it?" Clara mused, popping a sweet berry into her mouth. "Like the ancient oaks themselves, once your roots go down, they go deep." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized his roots were indeed starting to intertwine with something beautiful here. "Speaking of roots and journeys," he began, gesturing to the map, "I was wondering if you might like to help me explore some of Oakhaven's lesser-known corners. This map, it points to a few places I've yet to discover." Clara's eyes lit up. "Oh, I'd love that. I know this village like the back of my hand, but there are always hidden nooks and crannies. My grandmother always said the best secrets are written not on paper, but whispered on the wind to those who listen." And so began their shared exploration. Their first expedition was to a forgotten trail marked with a faint, almost invisible dash on his map. It led them through a sun-dappled forest, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Clara pointed out rare wildflowers he would have walked past, told him the names of birds by their calls, and shared local legends about the whispering trees. He, in turn, showed her how to read the subtle changes in the terrain, how to spot ancient markers, and shared tales of daring explorers from his beloved books. They found a small, secluded waterfall, its waters tumbling into a crystal-clear pool, surrounded by moss-covered stones. It wasn't a grand, roaring cascade, but a gentle, murmuring curtain of water hidden from the world. They sat on a smooth rock, sharing a simple picnic lunch Clara had packed, homemade bread, local cheese, and more of her sweet berries. "This place," Clara whispered, her gaze soft. "It feels like a secret the earth keeps just for itself. How did your map even find it?" He smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. "Some maps, Clara, aren't just about routes. They're about feelings, about the spirit of a place. This one seems to have a soul of its own." He paused, then looked at her. "Or perhaps it just knew I needed to find it with you." The unspoken words hung in the air, sweet and fragile. Clara met his gaze, a blush rising on her cheeks. Her hand resting on the rock between them trembled slightly. He reached out, covering it with his own. Her skin was warm, soft, and the simple touch sent a jolt of quiet electricity through him. He saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, a question, a hope. "It does feel special, doesn't it?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. Over the following weeks, their joint expeditions became a cherished ritual. They discovered a grove of ancient apple trees, still bearing fruit despite decades of neglect, and gathered them for Clara to bake into a sublime crumble. They found the ruins of an old mill by the river, its stone walls now covered in ivy, where they imagined the lives that once bustled there. Each discovery, no matter how small, felt imbued with a deeper meaning because they found it together. With each shared path and whispered secret, their hearts grew closer. He learned of Clara's quiet strength, her unwavering optimism, and the deep well of kindness that seemed to flow endlessly from her. She, in turn, saw past his reserved exterior to the passionate, thoughtful man beneath, a man who found wonder in the smallest details and whose quiet gaze held a depth she found endlessly captivating. One blustery autumn afternoon, as leaves danced in crimson and gold around them, they were tracing a particularly faint line on the map that seemed to lead to the highest point overlooking Oak Haven. The path was steep, overgrown, and challenging. As they neared the summit, a sudden gust of wind nearly swept Clara off her feet. He caught her, his arms wrapping instinctively around her waist, pulling her close. She looked up at him, her hair a wild halo around her face, her eyes wide. The proximity, the unexpected intimacy, made his breath catch. He felt the warmth of her body against his, the gentle flutter of her heart. For a long moment, they simply stood there, suspended in the wind and the fading light, the world narrowing to just the two of them. "Are you all right?" he managed, his voice a little rougher than he intended. Clara nodded, a soft smile gracing her lips. "More than all right, actually. Thank you." She didn't pull away immediately, and neither did he. The embrace felt natural, comfortable, like a missing piece finally slotting into place. When they finally reached the summit, the view took their breath away. Oak Haven stretched out below them, a patchwork of cottages, gardens, and winding lanes, bathed in the soft golden light of the setting sun. Beyond it, the rolling hills faded into the misty distance, and the sky above them was a canvas of fiery oranges and purples. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," Clara breathed, her voice filled with awe. He didn't look at the view. He looked at her, her profile etched against the vibrant sky. "It is," he agreed, his voice low. "But it's nothing compared to this, Clara." He turned her gently to face him, his hands still on her waist. "Being here, with you, that's the real discovery." Her eyes, usually so bright, shimmered with unshed tears. "I feel it too," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've lived in Oak Haven my whole life, but it's only now, with you, that I feel like I'm truly seeing it for the first time. Like I'm seeing everything for the first time." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but she didn't. Instead, her gaze held his, full of trust and a burgeoning tenderness. He lowered his head, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was soft, tentative, and utterly profound. It was a kiss that tasted of autumn leaves and shared secrets, of hope and a future suddenly unfolding before them. It was a kiss that sealed the quiet magic they had been building, brick by slow, careful brick. From that day forward, their connection deepened exponentially. The map still lay on his coffee table, but it was no longer just a guide. It was a testament to their journey. They continued their explorations, each new place they found together becoming a monument to their growing love. They built traditions, Sunday morning pancakes at his cottage, evening strolls along the river, quiet nights by the fireplace, reading aloud from old books. One particularly chilly evening, as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, they sat by the crackling fire in his cottage, mugs of steaming cider warming their hands. Clara was tracing the lines of the old map, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's one last spot," she murmured, pointing to a small unmarked circle in the very heart of Oak Haven. "It's just a blank space. My grandmother always said it was where the truest magic of Oak Haven lay hidden, but she never told me what it was." He looked at the spot, then back at her. "Maybe it's not a place we infending, Clara. Maybe it's a place we make." She looked up, her eyes wide and questioning. He took a deep breath, his heart thrumming with a newfound courage. "I came to Oak Haven seeking a home, a place to finally put down roots. I found the cottage. I found the quiet life I craved. But it was you, Clara, who made it feel like magic. You are the heart of Oak Haven's magic for me." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "This cottage, this village, it feels like home now because you're here. And I can't imagine a future where you're not. Would you? Would you consider making this blank space on the map our shared future? Our home together? Clara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure joy. A radiant smile bloomed on her face, illuminating the entire room. "Oh, yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. 1,000 times, yes. He leaned forward, pulling her into a tender embrace. The scent of her, wild berries and warm earth, filled his senses, grounding him, comforting him. He felt her heart beating against his, a steady rhythm that echoed his own. They spent the rest of the evening dreaming aloud, weaving their hopes and plans into the fabric of their shared future. They talked about expanding the garden, about painting the kitchen a soft shade of blue, about quiet evenings and bustling mornings. They talked about continuing their map-led adventures, but now with a deeper purpose, to discover not just places, but the boundless depths of their love. The snowflakes outside fell thicker now, blanketing Oakhaven in a pristine white. The old map lay forgotten on the coffee table, its mysteries unraveled, its true purpose fulfilled. For he had found his greatest treasure not in a marked location, but in the woman beside him. Oakhaven was indeed a home, a sanctuary of quiet beauty, but it was Clara, with her gentle spirit and radiant heart, who made it feel like an endless, heartwarming magic. And as they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew their journey had only just begun, a beautiful, love-filled odyssey, etched not on paper, but in the very fabric of their souls.